I will be the chairman for the research workshop today. I'm an assistant professor of regenerative medicine, cellular therapeutics. I'm the director of the College of Medicine Research Center at King Saud University. For the first 15 minutes, we'll be talking about research in general in the kingdom, and then we'll move to our first lecture, which is how to read a paper. So, as we know, in the past 10 years, research have boomed in Saudi Arabia. That is partially due to the infrastructure and projects that was done by the government in order to boost research. As we can see here from a paper published in 2013 that most of our publications are still within the Western Middle region. We can see that King Saud University and King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah and King Faisal Hospital, they have the highest output. I guess that is logical because of the funding. If we know that King Saud University, King Faisal University have the biggest funding in Saudi when it comes to research, so it's logical to assume that they will have the highest true output. In another paper that was published in 2014, I think, people have tried to actually see what is the most common research subject that was conducted in Saudi. And for that, the first 5 was the biggest 5 branches of medicine: obstetric surgery, medicine, pathology, and family medicine. And still, most of the research, more than 65%, was concentrated in Riyadh. I guess because most of the big hospitals are concentrated in Riyadh as well, and Jeddah. This is a new paper that was published just a few months ago. It shows the clinical studies, which is also a part of our medical research, that was conducted in Saudi for the past, I guess, 15 years. And as you can see, that the number of clinical trials does not reflect the strength and infrastructure of research in Saudi Arabia. I guess partly this is because of the regulations that is imposed by Saudi FDA recently, and but the numbers are nevertheless are high. We can say that again, King Faisal Specialist Hospital, King Saud University, and the MAM University were the highest 3 entities in Saudi that were conducting clinical trials. And this is our own data. This is data that comes from King Saud University that we just obtained a few weeks ago. This shows the best decade, the past 10 years of research output in the in the middle region. That covers only Riyadh. And again, King Saud University, King Faisal Specialist Hospital were among the highest in publication output. كينج هلا حبيبي
ترفع صوتك شوية
شور
علشان الصوت
شور كو
هنا علشان الصوت يجي من الزاوية ايوه وعادي
اوكي ثانك يو حبيبي. Also, when we're talking about research, we have to talk about quantity and quality of research. We were only looking at the quantity, which is the number of publications published per year, but we also did a study where we thought to see the quality of research that is produced in these hospitals, and we used the indexing of these journals as a measure of seeing how much quality of papers that is coming in our institutes. Of course, ISI journals are the benchmark or the standard for medical publications. And comes after that Scopus, which is a new database formed in 2005. We are still considering that publishing in an ISI journal is the gold standard. And as you can see that most of our researchers are publishing in an ISI journal. There are a few that are still publishing in Scopus, but the percentage shows that our quality is also good. So where are the problems in research then? The problems comes from the amount of output that is, when you're considering the population and budget of Saudi Arabia. The thing is, when you're talking about population, a country like Australia, which is considered the benchmark in the world for publications per capita or per individual, if we normalize this to 100, Saudi Arabia comes really at the bottom of the list. We have 2.9 in comparison to the 100% of Australia, which is a really low number. If you also go to the GDP, how much of our budget is being spent on research, we actually don't score in the top 20 countries in the world. We're actually number 34, which is really low. If you look here, these data were from CACST, it's an official governmental data, and you can see that the number of articles that are produced per $1 billion of GDP, Saudi, in comparison to the other Arabian country, also doesn't come at the lead. I guess that's because the other countries have lower budgets, and when you compare that to the output, they will put them in the front. But if you look at the graph down, you'll see that in the whole Arab world does not constitute more than 1.4% of the total GDP of the whole world, and it doesn't constitute more than 0.5% of the biomedical research. This is really, really low. SWOT analysis were done by CACST, a governmental, and I will only emphasize on the important parts from my opinion. Our strength in Saudi will come from the existence of research funds in the government. And recently, this year, 2018, there was a huge increase in the research budget allocated from the government. There are huge funds under the Ministry of Health and under the Ministry of Education. So tapping into these funds should be the priority of researchers in the coming few years. If we are talking about the opportunities, development, I guess the most important one will be the development of health and medical research industry. And this is ongoing through collaborations with big entities in the world. Bill Gates was here for his foundation to support research. Google is going to build a hub in Saudi. Tapping into these resources should be the priority of our researchers in the next few years. When we're talking about the negative stuff, lack of effective collaborative research efforts would be the number one reason why our research is not going the way it should be. In order to do a good publication or a good paper, collaboration between institutes internally and outside Saudi is the way to do that. Unfortunately, in Saudi, research institutes are working alone. I rarely find that there is collaborations between big entities, for example, King Saud University and CACST, or KMARC and King Saud University. I guess that this is one of the biggest problems, and it should be tackled really soon. A consortium maybe between these research centers should pave the road for researchers to actually do better research. Also, the scarcity of private sector grants for research in developed countries, and United States and European countries, most of our research grants come from the private sector, from the drug companies, from the big companies that have huge funds for research. Unfortunately, in Saudi, that is not the case. In Saudi, private sector doesn't contribute to, I would say, more than 5% of the grants for research. Most of our grants come from KACST and KAUST, some from the government itself, but the private sector is almost not there. Also, there are, and this is one of the major problems when we're working in an academic institute, the limited incentives for researchers who are doing research, especially clinicians. Clinicians would find it a little bit hard to do the clinical work and do research at the same time without having incentives for them going into the research track. Finally, our threats, the immobilization of initial funding and the insufficient commitment by private sector and healthcare providers would be the most common problems. The problems with the researchers obtaining fund, even if they succeeded in obtaining fund, there is a problem with the continuity of that fund. I know a lot of people who have had their funds approved and they had even a portion of the money, and then through non-commitment of these researching bodies, unfortunately the funding does not continue. I will take KACST as an example. On the past few years, I know a lot of people, including me, who have had approved research proposals from KACST, but they haven't got the funding yet. That is really hindering the ability of our researchers to actually conduct good research. Finally, I would say that the next 5 years is a golden era for research in Saudi. I would say that if we didn't tap into these resources that have been allocated by the government in the budget of 2018, we're missing a huge opportunity for doing research. I can tell you that there are 10 billion riyals that is under the Ministry of Education for research, and there is another 3 or 4 billion riyals under the Ministry of Health that are allocated also for research. Maybe the main thing that researchers don't know about it, so that's also a problem that is hindering us. The publicity of these granting bodies and granting funds is not being made public or being communicated to the research institutes in an effective way. But I hope that by 2018, most of our problems in research would have been solved, and we can go into a better environment and culture in Saudi Arabia for medical research. That being said, I'll move to the next topic, which is the first topic of our research course workshop today, which is how to read a scientific paper. And then we'll stop and have a coffee break, and then the other lectures will continue. So, how to read a scientific paper. Scientific papers are the heart of science community, we all know that, and in a session to learn how to read a paper quickly, I get a lot of students that are coming to me and saying that we cannot read more than 1 or 2 papers a day, and if you give them a literature review, they will struggle and take months for them to read. Reading a scientific article is really easy if you know the tricks and tips. It shouldn't take you more than 20 to 30 minutes to read a paper if you really go through it, and it shouldn't take more than 5 minutes to know if that paper is the paper that you're really looking for or not. So why bothering about reading journals? First, because recently textbooks are outdated. We all know that. The time that takes for a textbook to actually be updated is maybe 3 to 5 years at minimum. Journals are updated monthly, so we know that now they are the main source of knowledge in the medical field. Journals are generally the most accessible means of obtaining information. You can just go online and read a paper, while the book, you'll have to buy it. And again, the books are outdated nowadays. You can get a good explanation of your data and enough details to replicate what you read about. So if you read a journal and you like the experiment that they are doing, you can just go to the methodology section and try to replicate whatever they have done. This is usually not available in books. To find out exactly what is the latest developments are in the field, to find out how a certain piece of research was done, and because one day you will be writing papers too. When we're talking about papers for scientific medical publications, we're talking about two main papers: review articles and primary or original research articles. Review articles, as the name implies, overview of scientific field by a topic summarizing the data or conclusions from many studies. While on contrast, the primary research articles contain the original data and conclusions of researchers who were involved in the experiments and how the experiments were done. Usually we'll look at review articles when we want to get more knowledge about a certain subject, while we go to original research articles when we're looking for a specific topic and the updates on that topic. Why we have to learn how to read a paper? We have to learn how to do research, and in order to do that, we have to learn how to think critically about the quality of research papers, and we have to gain perspective about what are we reading in that paper. In most scientific journals, the scientific papers follows an IMRD structure, which is introduction, materials and methods, results and discussion. Although nowadays some journals are combining the results and discussion in one section, but most of the journals are still keeping the IMRD structure. When you are looking at a paper, there are three main things that should grasp your eye: the title, the abstract, and then the rest of the paper. Usually you should look at the title first. If the publisher of the journal has a good, catchy title, it's whatever you're gonna read or look at. Boring titles are not something that people usually will read. And if you're interested in the title, then you should go directly to the abstract. The abstract is the summary of the paper. It should tell you what is in the paper in a crude way. And then when you read that, you should be able to decide if that paper is something that I should continue reading or not. Many people actually go through the paper and try to read it all to fish for whatever they need, and that's a mistake. You should only go to the title and abstract and then decide if this is the paper that you're gonna read or not. Usually when you're looking at the paper, you will see the title, the abstract, the introduction, and then the results and discussion. Each section of these summarizes a portion of the work. The title should be eye-catching. The abstract says why the research was conducted and why the researcher himself is conducting it. The introduction should tell you when and whom and why and what was the research was done, and how and where will lead you to the results section. And then in the results, you will see what was done in that paper. And from there, you can see the discussion why they think the results are important and how to improve on such results, if any. We'll go one by one through the sections of the paper. The titles and authors. Title is very important. The order of authors is very important. You can tell a lot of things from the order of the authors. Most people don't know that the last author is the most prestigious author. The first author is usually the person, or the first two authors are usually the people who have conducted the research themselves. Last author is the person who actually supervised the research. He's usually the most senior person. And if you are trying to inquire something about a paper, it's nice to contact the first author or the last author. It depends what you're actually looking for. If you're looking for a question about the methodology of the paper or how it was done, then you should contact the first author. If you're looking about the big picture and you want to continue working on the same subject, then maybe it's a wise idea to contact the last or the most senior author on the paper. Generally, when you first read an abstract, you first read the abstract in order to understand the major points of the work. It clarifies whether you in fact know enough, and it refreshes your memory about the topic. And if you're reading an abstract and you find that there are stuff that you do not understand, then it's advisable that you go from an original article to a review about the same subject, refresh your ideas, and then go back to original articles. It should help you as a reader to integrate new information on your previous knowledge about the topic. Then we go from the title to abstract to introduction. Introduction and discussion are usually inversed. The introduction starts from a big picture, and then it goes slowly to a smaller scope and gradually reaching the main purpose of the paper, which usually the last paragraph on the introduction. The logical flows of papers go straight from introduction to results, and then the discussion for interpretation of the findings. Usually the discussion starts from a small point and then goes bigger and bigger until it reaches the main theme of the paper, or why these findings affect the section of the affect the section of the experiments that you are working on. So how to approach the introduction? Grab a blank piece of paper, and usually now it's not a paper, just electronically you can do it. Take notes, draw figures, and define the difficult vocabulary that you don't know. And then try to answer these questions. What is the hypothesis being tested, and what are the basic conclusions of this study? Then examine the figures. The figures are the most important part of the paper, actually. You can just skip from the title and go and look at the figures. If you find in the figures something that is appealing to your idea, then maybe go back to the paper and try to read it. Take notes within the figures, and with each experiment or figure, you should be able to explain the basic procedure, the question is thought to answer, the results, and the conclusion, and criticism for that figure. Usually figures represent an experiment, and you can critically criticize that experiment if you're trying to do something similar. When you are taking notes, ask yourself these questions. What conclusions do the authors draw? And describe for yourself why this data is significant. What is your opinion about the paper? And we're trying to do read a paper, try to go away from whatever the author is trying to tell you. Try to come up with your own opinion. The author is usually fixed on his results, and he will try to explain it and deliver it to you in the way that he sees fit. But of course, if you're doing research on the same subject, then it's better to actually think outside the box. Although his data is published, is it actually correct for your idea or not? And does it contribute to the knowledge or correct errors that you already have in your research thinking? And by now, most people reach a point where they leave the paper. When they look at the figures and see it is overwhelming, they actually go and move to the next paper, which is wrong. Try to continue with the paper. Do you agree with the author's rationale for setting up the experiments that they did? Did they perform the experiments appropriately? Were there enough experiments to support their major findings? Do you see trends and patterns in their data? And do you agree with the author's conclusions? what further questions do you have, and what might you suggest to do next? Always think of the author data as the famous duck and rabbit figure. It depends what do you want to see. The author will tell you it's a rabbit or it's a duck, but it's up to you to decide if it's a rabbit or a duck. Make up your own opinion about results and don't take them as they are. Try to struggle with the paper, active and not passive reading. As we said, try to come up with your own ideas. Try to implement them in the paper and see if they match the logic of the paper. If you don't understand, read and reread and go into the central points over and over until you actually understand what the author wants to say. If you don't, and there is something missing in the paper that you don't understand, you can usually communicate with the author and try him to explain how this method is done and what was done in the section that you do not understand. And then get into the question asking mode, get used to doing peer review, and just because it's published, it doesn't mean it's right. And try to nitpick the paper, see if it goes with your flow of ideas or not. And try to move beyond the text of the paper, talk to other people about it, read commentaries, consult dictionaries, textbook, online references, figures to clarify things you do not understand. As a research person, talking with other people is the way to go. If you do not consult other people, you are usually fixed into your own circle of thoughts, and having a conversation with your co-workers, colleagues, or authors of other papers usually gets you out of that circle and introduces new ideas to your research. Don't give yourself very much time. Try to read a paper by setting a certain amount of time. 20 minutes is more than enough to read a paper. Try to have a paper before your meetings, or when you have, for example, I have a meeting at 12:30, I'll start reading it at 12:10, and because I have the meeting, I have to finish it before going into my meeting, which gives you a fixed time to actually go through the paper and summarize your thoughts and read it and see if that's the paper that you want to consider for your research or not. Ground rules that we have for reading papers: try to understand, don't be afraid to ask, be constructive, be polite, and don't be afraid to criticize, constructively, of course. And most of us never read a paper from start to finish. Read the title first, then go through the abstract, then the last paragraph of the introduction. Usually the last paragraph of the introduction is the part where the author is introducing to you the idea of what he is going to do in that paper. Then the first paragraph of discussion usually summarizes the results that the author found in his paper, and then look at the tables and figures. Some people look at the figures and tables before looking at the introduction and discussion. That's also a valid method. And try to read papers when you are awake and interested in reading. If you are going to break up a paper and read it over several days, be sure to summarize before continuing each day. And if you are interested in a subject, consider starting database on papers that relate to your interest. Usually it's a very wise idea to just have a folder in your desktop, or a paper folder if you're a paper person, just to collect the articles that you find interesting in a certain subject. That makes it really easy for you when you're trying to look for a certain idea to go back to your desktop, open the folder that you have, and just skim through your papers and see which one that answers the questions in your research. And that's it for now. Thank you very much.